me and Home never had one argument. You know what I'm saying? Ever in life. We never touched each other. Ever in life. We never exchanged no money ever in life. You know what I'm saying? The facts is just, I'm the biggest rapper from Memphis. You know what I'm saying?
All right. And then it just took a left turn somewhere.
See, this why this beef shit corny. You supposed to get tunnel vision, get yours, and get the hell out the way. Dolph said it was beef. He just said it won't. Y'all think telling the truth, because we did lose a real one in the process.
Welcome back to Buzzbuster. Yo Gotti took a public hit in Memphis, and no fight was needed to make it happen. This time, the move came from Key Glock. He showed up at Big Juck's gravesite, sent a message that quickly spread online, and suddenly, one of the city's biggest names was under pressure to answer. What looked like a simple visit turned into a moment that had Memphis talking. Here's why it carried so much weight. The location at the center of all this is Memphis Memorial Park Cemetery in Memphis, Shelby County, Tennessee. That is where Anthony Big Juck Mims was laid to rest in early February 2024. His burial came after he lost his life outside Perignon's restaurant and event center. By the time spring of 2026 rolled around, that resting place had become the focus of a new wave of tension. Between April 22 and April 28, 2026, talk began spreading across the internet about Key Glock visiting the grave of Yo Gotti's older brother. Once those images started circulating, the reaction was immediate. Social media ran with it, the cemetery address was reposted across multiple platforms, and Yo Gotti responded during that same stretch of time. In a matter of days, something deeply personal became a citywide conversation.
Dolph, treated like family, had now publicly appeared at the grave of the man internet rumors constantly tied to Dolph's murder saga. That alone was enough to force Yo Gotti into the conversation. For years, Gotti had mostly avoided publicly addressing the deeper accusations, rumors, and conspiracy theories connected to the Dolph situation. But suddenly, after Key Glock's appearance at the gravesite, that silence cracked.
That is where the story really begins. A gravesite visit does not shake Memphis unless the person buried there carried serious importance. To understand why this moment landed so hard, you first have to understand who Big Juck was and why his name meant so much behind the scenes. Anthony Big Juck Mims was more than just Yo Gotti's older brother. He was widely seen as a major figure operating behind the curtain at Collective Music Group. While artists and hit records took the spotlight, people familiar with the label knew Big Juck had influence where it mattered most. He was part of the machine that helped shape the business side of that world, and his presence was tied closely to the larger CMG story. Born in 1976, Big Juck represented a different kind of power. He was not known mainly for being in front of the camera. Instead, his role was associated with control, structure, and the kind of authority that often stays out of public view.
And it could never uncross. It was no longer music tension. It had become something far darker. In 2024, the courtroom became more explosive than any diss track. During proceedings tied to young Dolph's murder, prosecutors alleged that Big Juck was connected to a bounty plot on Dolph. The internet went nuclear. Suddenly, stories people treated like rumor were being discussed inside court.
That made his name significant long before this cemetery visit ever became a trending topic. So when Key Glock appeared at that gravesite, people did not interpret it as random. They saw symbolism. They saw provocation. Most of all, they saw a message aimed directly at the heart of Memphis rap politics. The internet responded exactly the way you would expect. Posts multiplied, opinions flew in every direction, and users started piecing together every image, timestamp, and location detail they could find. Once the address was identified and shared online, the situation grew even larger. It was no longer just about who visited a grave. It became about what that visit represented and who it was intended for. That is why Yo Gotti had little room to stay silent. In a city where reputation matters, a moment like this does not just disappear. Whether people viewed it as disrespect, strategy, or calculated messaging, the pressure to react was immediate. Memphis was watching, and the internet made sure the moment could not be ignored. What happened next only added more fuel. A private act became a public challenge, and a cemetery became the backdrop for one of the most talked about rap storylines in the city. Memphis has seen its share of tension before, but this struck a different nerve because of the names involved and the history attached to them. At the center of it all was one question: why would a single graveside visit create this much noise? Because in Memphis, symbolism can hit harder than words.
Then came the moment that reignited everything. Reports said Key Glock visited the grave of Big Jook, brother of Yo Gotti, and the internet lost its mind instantly. Some called it savage, some called it disrespectful, others called it symbolic revenge without violence.
Behind the scenes of Cocaine Music Group, Big Jook didn't hold a flashy public title. You never saw CEO or president attached to his name. Still, testimony in court and multiple industry sources painted a very different picture. They placed him right in the middle of CMG's daily operation, deeply involved in the work that kept the label moving. His role appeared to go far beyond a simple family connection. He was reportedly involved in finding new talent, helping manage projects, and keeping artists active and visible. In many ways, he seemed to serve as the link between Memphis street culture and the business side of rap. That made him an important figure, even without an official title on paper. Online, his presence reflected that same mission. His Instagram account, IGJugCMG, was used to promote his brother's music and support the broader brand. By that point, the CMG roster had become a major force, with names like Moneybagg Yo, Youngster, ESTG, and Glorilla helping define the label's rise. Big Jook's name may not have been front and center in public, but his influence was often described as constant.
That changes everything. Fans flooded timelines with outrage, confusion, and fear. Then reports spread that Key Glock's name was also allegedly tied to a hit list conversation. Social media erupted with Protect Glock messages everywhere. Meanwhile, Yo Gotti's name got dragged into endless speculation despite no charges tied to those claims.
Everything changed on January 13th. 2024. That afternoon, Big Jook was outside Paradox's restaurant and event center, located on the 6300 block of Winchester Road in Hickory Hill. He was attending a repast for a relative, Eric Boven, who had died on December 31st, 2023. What should have been a gathering to honor family suddenly turned into a scene of chaos. Around 4:15 p.m., shots were reported in the area. A Memphis police officer who was already nearby heard the gunfire and rushed toward the location. When officers reached the scene, they found two people suffering from multiple injuries. Big Jook was one of them. He was transported to the hospital, but he did not survive. He was 47 years old. The second victim lived through the incident. Investigators later described the shooting as a targeted attack, a detail that immediately intensified public attention around the case. Surveillance footage reportedly identified a white Ford Explorer with black wheels and dark-tinted windows as the suspected vehicle. That image quickly became one of the key pieces in the early investigation, raising even more questions about who was behind the ambush and why.
The person is Anthony Mims, also known as Big Jook. Now, Big Jook is the brother of rapper Yo Gotti.
Just 13 days into the year of 2024, and Memphis has already taken another huge loss.
It's finna get ugly, y'all. They got it, brother.
Big Jook had just attended his uncle's funeral, who was a well-known kingpin.
For people who followed CMG, the news landed hard. Big Jook has long been seen as one of the quiet engines behind the scenes, someone who played a serious role without demanding public recognition. His death didn't just mark the loss of a family member or music executive figure. It also removed someone many believed helped shape the label's inner structure and daily momentum. The setting made the story feel even more unsettling. He wasn't at a club, a concert, or some high-profile industry event. He was at a family gathering meant to remember a loved one. That contrast only made the tragedy hit harder and added to the shock surrounding the case. As details emerged, the focus stayed on the same haunting facts: the time, the place, the targeted nature of the attack, and the vehicle caught on surveillance. Those pieces turned a local tragedy into a story that drew attention far beyond Memphis. Big Jook was later laid to rest, closing one chapter, but leaving many questions unanswered. Anthony "Big Jook" Mims was laid to rest at Memorial Park Cemetery after funeral services held in late January and early February of 2024 at New Direction Christian Church in Hickory Hill. The eulogy came from Dr. Stacy L. Spencer, who gave the message the title, King of the Hill.
Because of the way Big Jook died, his family made sure nothing was left to chance. Security at the funeral was intense. Roughly 25 armed private guards were stationed around the church, covering the inside, the exterior, and even the rooftops. Extra protection was also visible overhead, while Memphis police supported the operation with patrol units positioned around nearby streets and a helicopter circling above. Even with all the public attention, the case has remained unresolved. As of 2025 and moving into 2026, the killing of Anthony Big Jook Mims is still unsolved. No suspect has been publicly identified and no arrest has been announced. The report tied to the case is listed as number 240-102-4895. Later, during a post-trial interview, Me Govan was asked about Big Jook being killed. His response echoed rumors that had already been spreading quietly for some time. Govan suggested that the same evidence prosecutors used against him may have also connected in some way to Big Jook, possibly even more strongly. From Govan's point of view, he believed he became the easier person to target because he did not have the kind of financial backing or influence that Big Jook had. That advantage, in his view, came through family ties. Big Jook's brother is Yo Gotti. That detail only added more intrigue to an already heavily discussed case. With no public breakthrough, no named suspect, and no charges filed, speculation has continued to fill the silence left by investigators. For now, though, the official reality has not changed. The case remains open, the questions remain unanswered, and the death of Anthony Big Jook Mims continues to sit in the cold case file with no public resolution.
For nearly 2.5 years, Mario Centel-Gittin Mims, better known as Yo Gotti, the founder of CMG, kept his public response tightly controlled. During that entire stretch, his brother's name continued to surface in courtroom testimony connected to the killing of young Dolph. Still, Gotti said nothing. That long silence is exactly why the grave visit in April 2026 landed with such force.
Because think about the layers. Glock is the cousin of Dolph, and prosecutors had publicly tied Big Jook's name to serious allegations around Dolph's murder case. So when Glock allegedly showed up there, people saw a message in silence. No speech, no threats, just standing there.
Key Glock didn't need to post a long statement. He didn't need to release a diss track or explain a thing. All he had to do was appear at the headstone of the man prosecutors said arranged Dolph's death. Once those images began circulating online, the meaning was impossible to miss. According to reports, Glock made the visit alone. There was no confrontation, no heated exchange, no law enforcement response. Cemetery workers did not file any complaint, and Memphis police were never called to the scene. On paper, nothing happened, yet the moment still carried enormous weight. What made it so striking was not any crime, argument, or public spectacle. It was the symbolism. Dolph's closest musical partner, someone he treated like family, was now standing at the burial site of the man accused of helping set Dolph's killing in motion. Without saying a word, the image spoke for itself. That is what made the situation impossible to ignore. For years, Yo Gotti had maintained a noticeable distance from public controversy surrounding the case. He avoided direct comment, even as speculation grew, and courtroom developments kept pulling his family's name back into the conversation. Then this happened. The visit by Key Glock shifted the energy instantly. It turned a quiet, unresolved tension into a visual statement that spread fast and hit even harder because it was so controlled.
There was no need for drama in the traditional sense. No shouting, no public back and forth, no police tape. The power came from how deliberate it looked. A single appearance at a grave became one of the loudest messages in the entire fallout surrounding Dolph's death. And that is what finally broke the pattern. After years of saying very little in public, Yo Gotti addressed the situation directly. For someone who had stayed measured and mostly silent while so much unfolded around him, that response stood out. It signaled that this was different. Whatever had been ignored before could no longer be brushed aside now. To understand why that one gesture was powerful enough to draw Gotti out after such a long period of silence, you have to go back. Not just to the recent courtroom testimony, not just to the death of Big Jook, not even only to the day young Dolph was killed. The real story starts earlier than all of that. Because this wasn't just about a visit to a cemetery. It wasn't only about one image going viral or one artist making a statement without words. It was the latest chapter in a much deeper conflict, one shaped by loyalty, loss, suspicion, and years of public tension building beneath the surface.
While he was at the bakery, two masked men pulled up in a white Mercedes. They opened fire through the bakery window. Dolph was hit 22 times. He died instantly at the scene. But this is the reason why he got killed. For years, Dolph had been caught in a dangerous rap beef with another Memphis rapper, Yo Gotti. In 2017, someone shot at Dolph's SUV with over 100 bullets in Charlotte. Somehow, he survived. Later that same year, he was shot again in Los Angeles.
By the time those images reached the internet, the reaction was immediate because people already understood the history behind them. They knew the names, they knew the allegations, they knew the weight attached to that grave and to the man standing beside it. That history is what made the moment feel explosive, even though everything about it appeared calm. So when Yo Gotti finally responded, it didn't happen in a vacuum. It came after years of silence, months of renewed attention, and one image that turned old tensions into a fresh headline. To see why that moment mattered so much, we have to rewind all the way back, before the trials, before Big Juke's death, and before young Dolph was killed.
Go back to 2014. When a private conversation between two Memphis rap figures set off a chain of events that would shape everything that followed. What happened in that room did not end the way one side had hoped, and from there, the tension began to grow. The early record of the Yo Gotti and young Dolph conflict traces back to that period. At the time, young Dolph, born Adolph Thornton Jr., was still building his name as an independent mixtape artist from Memphis. He had been releasing music on his own since roughly 2009 and 2010, pushing his work under the Paper Route Empire banner and creating momentum without leaning on a major machine. Meanwhile, Yo Gotti was already established. His camp, CMG, which was still known then as Cocaine Music Group, had real power and visibility. He was in a strong position, and according to multiple reports, he made an effort to bring Dolph onto the label. Dolph turned it down. That decision became one of the earliest major turning points in their story. In an August 2014 appearance on Sway in the Morning, Dolph explained the reasoning in his own words. His focus was ownership. He made it clear that independence mattered more to him than joining someone else's operation, no matter how big the opportunity looked from the outside. By that stage, he had already committed serious resources to his own rise. Reports said he had invested around $3 million of his own money into building his career. From his perspective, that wasn't just spending. It was proof of belief. He had already put too much into his platform to pass control over to anyone else. Importantly, he did not present the rejection as a personal attack. The way he framed it, this was about business structure, self-belief, and staying in charge of his own path. For Dolph, the issue was simple. He believed he could win without signing away the foundation he had built.
Even so, moments like that rarely stay contained behind closed doors for long, especially when two names from the same city are involved. Memphis had two strong personalities moving in the same world, and once the offer was declined, the situation carried a different energy.
Why do they keep trying to make it a rap beef between you and Gotti, though?
If it's something about you I just don't respect, bro, I can't sit and fake and act like it's all good.
That's understandable.
Know what I'm saying? Like, the first time I even met little dude, go in the studio. First time. He sent everybody out the studio. Like, let me holler at Dolph. Like, man, you got your own everything. You popular. But you got the money, you got your team, you got this, you got that. Like,
what may have started as a label conversation gradually became part of a much bigger narrative. Things truly started spilling into public view in early 2016. On February 11th, 2016, young Dolph posted a tweet that drew attention and added fuel to the situation. That message marked one of the first times the tension seemed impossible to ignore from the outside. It suggested that whatever had once been discussed privately was no longer staying private. From there, the story became more visible, more complicated, and much harder to separate from the music. What had originally looked like a business decision from 2014 was now being viewed as the spark behind a growing rivalry. The rejected deal, the commitment to independence, and the public comments all combined into a narrative that fans and observers would keep tracking for years. In the end, the foundation of the conflict appears to begin with a simple but high-stakes moment. An established Memphis star
wanted to sign a rising hometown artist, and that artist chose to bet on himself instead. Dolph stood on ownership. Gotti had already built his own empire. Once those two positions collided, the fallout started writing its own history. It went from support to straight-up hostility.
He a hater, you know what I mean? Matter of fact, he my biggest hater. You know what I mean? He wanted to sign me. He wanted me to come over there and let him give me some money, give me a car and all that. Nah, I don't need that. I got my own ice, real ice. You know what I mean? They rocking that fake ice. Like I rock real ice. I be trying not to do too much stunt and flexing and talking too much because I make rappers feel uncomfortable. You know what I mean? So like I don't respect nobody that hate on any other man for nothing.
One minute, the energy looked like admiration. The next, it had turned into open resentment. Around the city, plenty of people took that shift as a direct jab at Yo Gotti.
Not long after, young Dolph released his first official studio album, King of Memphis. That title wasn't random, and it definitely wasn't subtle. For a long time, Yo Gotti had been tied to that exact image, using the King of Memphis label as part of his identity. By naming the album that, Dolph was making a bold statement in public. In the eyes of many fans, he was stepping forward and saying the crown belonged to him now. From there, the tension only got worse. As 2016 moved along, the situation kept heating up and becoming harder to ignore. What may have started as competitive energy turned into something much more personal and much more visible. Soon, CMG artist Black Youngster added fuel to the fire. He released a diss track called Shake Some, and listeners immediately connected it to Dolph. The message didn't stop with the music either. Black Youngster also recorded himself in Dolph's South Memphis neighborhood, a move that made the situation feel even more confrontational and public. Dolph didn't stay quiet. In February 2017, he answered with Play With Yo Bitch, and he came back hard. On that record, he called out Yo Gotti directly by name. At times, he even used the nickname Ho Gotti, making it clear there was no confusion about who the song was aimed at. He also included personal accusations in the lyrics, which pushed the record beyond a simple rap response and into much more serious territory. According to Trap Laura Ross, that song hit especially hard for a reason. It wasn't only aimed at Gotti. Big Juke was mentioned by name too, which widened the target and made the diss feel even more aggressive. That alone would have been enough to get people talking, but the visuals added another layer. Everything about the release seemed designed to make sure nobody missed the message.
Dolph later spoke on the track himself during an appearance on Hot 107.9 in Atlanta. When the conversation turned to the song, the interviewer brought up a screenshot that had been circulating. On it, the contact name appeared as Ho Gotti, followed by the phrase, "Play with your bitch," along with 24 missed calls. It was one of those details that made the record even more talked about online, because fans saw it as a glimpse into how real the tension had become. During the interview, Dolph confirmed it. That moment mattered because it showed he wasn't trying to walk anything back. He stood on what he said, and that only made the situation feel bigger. By then, this wasn't just rap competition anymore. It had grown into one of the most talked about feuds in Memphis, with every release, every interview, and every visual adding more pressure. What made the whole situation so compelling was how public everything became. Nothing was hidden behind vague lines or industry whispers. The songs were direct, the names were direct, even the imagery was direct. Fans didn't have to guess who was involved or what side anyone was on. That level of openness is a big reason the feud kept gaining attention. Every move felt intentional. Every title, every lyric, every appearance seemed to build on the last one. By this point, the conflict had become bigger than just music. It was about status, reputation, and who really had the strongest claim to the city. This time, Dolph made it clear he believed the issue was genuine. In his view, once you're focused on real money and real business, random negativity doesn't even deserve your attention. Still, what really stood out to him wasn't just the noise. He seemed to feel that Yo Gotti had already leaned on his name before to generate attention, and that changed how he looked at the whole situation.
Rather than present his response like a reckless attack, Dolph positioned it as a statement of what he believed to be true. His angle wasn't simply to trade insults for headlines. Instead, he used the record to spell out the logic behind his stance and explain why he felt compelled to address it in the first place. That approach gave the song a different kind of weight. It came off less like random tension and more like a calculated message aimed at setting the record straight from his perspective. Meanwhile, Yo Gotti handled the early phase of the situation in a very different way. Publicly, he kept his distance.
During interviews, he avoided diving directly into the conflict. On The Breakfast Club, for example, he stopped short of mentioning Dolph by name. That choice mattered because it allowed him to speak around the tension without fully stepping into it on camera. Back in 2017, Gotti even said that he and Dolph had never had a single argument in their lives. The way he framed it made the entire situation sound almost non-existent. No major falling out, no personal dispute, no business issue hanging over them. Listening to that version, you could easily come away believing there was no serious problem at all, at least not in the way the public had started to assume. His musical response arrived through Don't Beef With Me alongside Moneybagg. On that record, Yo Gotti touched the situation without directly putting Dolph's name in the center of the conversation. It was a careful move, almost like acknowledging the tension while still keeping one foot outside of it. Even with that approach, though, a lot of people weren't fully convinced. In the streets, that kind of indirect message didn't necessarily settle anything. If anything, it left even more room for speculation. That's where the bigger conversation started to grow. Lord Ross broke down several of the theories that were circulating at the time, and one of the most notable ideas was that people may have been looking at two separate conflicts as if they were just one. According to that line of thinking, there was the rap industry rivalry everyone could see in songs, interviews, and public statements.
Before young Dolph became one of the most influential rappers and a community leader, he declined an offer from another Memphis rapper, Yo Gotti, to join his label, CMG. After Dolph crowned himself King of Memphis with his debut album, their feud began to intensify. Later that year, one of CMG's members, Black Youngster, appeared in Dolph's neighborhood armed, escalating the conflict beyond music.
At the exact same time, there may have also been a completely different issue unfolding at the street level in Memphis between two separate camps. That distinction changes the way the entire story is understood. If both situations were happening at once, then what fans heard in music may have only been one layer of a much bigger picture. The industry side gave the public something visible to follow, but underneath it, there were claims of a deeper local divide involving alliances, loyalty, and neighborhood politics. Dolph's position became even more complicated because he had signed an artist who, according to that theory, was connected to the wrong side of that street conflict. That detail fueled even more talk because it suggested the tension may not have been limited to personal issues between two rappers. Instead, it may have involved a wider network of relationships and rivalries that extended beyond music. And that's where the story gets even murkier. Beyond the rap feud and beyond the alleged street-level divide, there was also talk of a third theory floating around. That possibility added another layer to an already tangled situation, making it clear that what was happening in public may have been only a fraction of what people believed was really going on behind the scenes. One moment pushed everything into the open, and Memphis OG Crunchy Black was the one who put it out for the public to see. 1090 Jake later spotlighted it on his platform, pointing out how similar the pattern looked to other rap conflicts that followed the same path. In his view, the early stage was all talk, tension, and public jabs. That part had largely played out by 2017. After that, the situation shifted into something far more serious. Looking back, the pressure had been building for years. It didn't happen overnight. The labor rejection in 2014 added fuel. Then came the King of Memphis project in 2016, which only raised the stakes even higher. By early 2017, diss records were circulating, the body double moment had people talking, and each new move seemed to push things closer to a breaking point. The mood kept getting hotter, piece by piece, until it felt obvious that the next development would not stay limited to music or online talk. By that stage, the tension had reached a level where nobody expected a quiet ending. The warning signs were already there. Every public shot, every response, and every bit of disrespect had stacked up. What began as rap competition had turned into something much more volatile. Once it crossed that line, the atmosphere changed completely. That's what made February 2017 such a turning point. During CIAA tournament weekend in Charlotte, North Carolina, the conflict became impossible to dismiss as just another rap feud. Before the night was over, young Dolph's bulletproof truck had reportedly been struck by more than 100 rounds. It was the kind of incident that instantly changed how people talked about everything that came before it. Suddenly, the earlier records, the comments, and the public back and forth no longer looked like isolated moments. They looked like steps leading toward one explosive night. The incident happened on February 25, 2017, at around 6:30 in the evening. Young Dolph was in Charlotte for CAIA weekend when a major exchange of gunfire broke out near North Caldwell Street and 8th Street. The area was close to an apartment complex and not far from the Spectrum Center, placing the chaos right in a busy part of the city. What happened there sent shockwaves far beyond Charlotte. According to reports, more than 100 rounds were fired at vehicles in the area. Authorities said Dolph's SUV was the intended target. Several other cars were also struck, and shell casings were scattered across the scene. The aftermath painted a clear picture of just how intense the incident had been. This was no minor confrontation. It was a full-scale attack in a public space with the kind of fallout that immediately grabbed headlines. What made the moment stand out even more was the setting. CAIA weekend already brings major crowds, energy, and attention to Charlotte. With so many people in town, an incident like this was always going to draw enormous focus. Once news spread that young Dolph's vehicle had been targeted, the story quickly became bigger than local news.
Sent some people to get over with Gotti. When he was leaving, and that's when he was approached by Cornelius. You asked him how did he know that, and he said that Dolph had an aunt or a cousin that lived by his dad, and Dolph had been bragging on the attempted hit on his brother, and Gotti was in the Rolls Royce bulletproof truck. Gotti is just so secretive, he never reported it. It wasn't even never on social media.
It turned into a defining chapter in a feud that had already been escalating for years. From that point on, nobody could pretend the situation was just music industry drama. The timeline told its own story. Tension in 2014, bigger statements in 2016, open musical attacks in early 2017, and then a public shooting in Charlotte. Each stage intensified the next. By the time that February night arrived, the conflict had moved far beyond words, and the consequences were on full display. Dolph was riding in a bulletproof truck, and when the chaos ended, he came out unharmed. No one else inside the vehicle was injured either. In the immediate aftermath, Charlotte-Mecklenburg police treated the incident as a shootout and launched a full investigation.
A few months later, by May 2017, authorities had arrested 3 suspects: 27-year-old Sammy Benson, 23-year-old Frederick Black, and 20-year-old Tavius Gardner. All 3 were charged with 6 counts of firing into an occupied vehicle. Even with that case unfolding, Dolph did not go silent. He responded the way many artists do best, through music, releasing songs such as 100 Shots in Charlotte and Bulletproof, turning a frightening headline into part of his story. What made the moment even more striking was what happened next. Instead of disappearing from the spotlight, Dolph still showed up for his scheduled performance that same night at Cameo nightclub. The event moved forward with Migos and 21 Savage also in the building, adding even more attention to an already tense situation. For fans and onlookers, that appearance only strengthened his image as someone unwilling to back down. From the very beginning, much of the media connected the shooting to the long-rumored tension involving Yo Gotti's circle. Speculation spread quickly online and in entertainment coverage. Black Youngsta had already released Shake, and earlier posts had surfaced showing people in Dolph's neighborhood carrying weapons, which only added fuel to the conversation. Even so, despite all the public guessing and internet theories, no criminal charges or official statements identified Yo Gotti, Black Youngster, or any CMG member as suspects in the Charlotte case. That distinction matters because while the rivalry was widely discussed, law enforcement did not publicly place those names in the investigation. Then, just months later, another serious incident put Dolph back in the headlines. On September 26, 2017, young Dolph was involved in a confrontation outside the Loews Hollywood Hotel near the Hollywood and Highland Shopping Center in Los Angeles. According to the Los Angeles Police Department, the situation began with an exchange involving 3 men. What started as a heated encounter quickly escalated. During the dispute, Dolph was shoved to the ground. The tension rose fast, and one of the men suddenly pulled out a weapon. In that moment, what had already become a troubling confrontation took a far more dangerous turn. The setting made it even more shocking. This was not some hidden backstreet incident far from public view. It happened outside a well-known hotel in a busy area, the kind of place where tourists, shoppers, and bystanders could easily be nearby. That detail gave the story even more weight as reports began to spread. By that point,
Dolph's name was already attached to a string of dramatic headlines, and every new development drew intense attention. His ability to continue moving forward after earlier violence had already become part of his public image. Still, this latest episode showed that the pressure surrounding him had not faded. Instead, it seemed to follow him from city to city, keeping his name in a cycle of music, speculation, and sudden real-world conflict. The pattern was impossible to ignore. First came the Charlotte shooting, then arrests, then the music, then a live performance just hours later. Now another confrontation had unfolded in Los Angeles under troubling circumstances. For many watching from the outside, it felt like each chapter only raised the stakes further. And through it all, one thing stayed consistent. Whenever the story seemed like it might slow down, another explosive development pushed it right back into the spotlight. Several shots were fired, and Dolph was struck more than once. His condition was described as severe, and he was taken to the hospital immediately. At first, there was hope that he would survive. Law enforcement in Los Angeles moved quickly. Before long, investigators tracked down Corey McClendon, a 43-year-old man from Memphis, and arrested him on suspicion of attempted murder. His bail was set at $1 million. What made the situation even more explosive was McClendon's background. Reports pointed to his ties to Memphis, along with alleged connections to people associated with Yo Gotti's circle.
Young Dolph hitman sentenced life in prison. Legendary Memphis rapper Young Dolph passed away a few years back, but just recently, Memphis detectives were able to solve his case. As a result, multiple people were arrested and blamed for the passing of Young Dolph. After a few months, the dark truth was revealed and the true suspect was brought forward. This evil man was recently seen in court being charged with first degree and a life sentence behind bars.
That detail instantly pushed the story into a bigger spotlight. Early coverage from TMZ added even more fuel to the speculation. The outlet reported that Yo Gotti was being looked at as a person of interest, largely because he and members of his entourage were staying at the same Lowe's Hollywood hotel as Dolph. Naturally, that sent rumors flying. By the very next day, though, the Los Angeles Police Department shut that down clearly and publicly. Authorities said Yo Gotti was neither a person of interest nor a suspect in the case. Despite the early headlines, police made it plain that he was not being treated as connected to the investigation in that way. As detectives continued digging into the case, the situation around McClendon also changed. In the end, he was released without charges while the investigation remained active. Looking back, that stretch in 2017, first Charlotte in February, then Hollywood in September, marked a turning point. What had once looked like a rap rivalry built on lyrics, interviews, and tension had now crossed into something much more serious in the real world. The feud was no longer limited to music. It had become a public and dangerous conflict that kept drawing more attention with every new headline.
At the same time, while much of the drama surrounding Yo Gotti seemed to be happening around him, his own legal issues in Memphis were also part of the story. Away from the cameras in Los Angeles and the rumors tied to the feud, there were incidents back home that added another layer to his public image. One of the earliest situations dates back to November 29, 2010. It happened over Thanksgiving weekend in southeast Memphis, in the parking lot outside a place called Level 2. According to reports, what unfolded there began with a confrontation between Yo Gotti, who was 29 at the time, and another Memphis rapper, Lance Dirty Taylor Ogbu. At first, it was described as a verbal dispute. Two local rap figures, one parking lot, and tension rising fast. From there, the argument reportedly escalated into a larger scene. Court affidavits would later be referenced as part of the account, helping shape how the incident was understood afterward. That moment mattered because it showed that the legal pressure surrounding Yo Gotti did not suddenly appear years later. Pieces of that pattern were already forming much earlier. Long before the feud headlines reached a national audience, there were already local incidents in Memphis that would become part of the broader story. So while 2017 brought a wave of major attention, the timeline did not begin there. The roots of the drama stretched back years, involving clashes, accusations, and situations that kept resurfacing as his profile grew. Each episode added more scrutiny, and each new development made the overall picture more complicated. According to reports, the situation boiled over when a third person stepped in. In the chaos, gunfire erupted right in the middle of the confrontation. 6 people were injured, but no one lost their life, and authorities said every injury was considered non-life-threatening.
Soon after, Memphis police began issuing warrants. Yo Gotti was charged with aggravated riot, which is a felony. The warrant was officially filed on December 13, 2010. Not long after that, he surrendered to authorities and entered a not guilty plea. Within weeks, the case against him fell apart. Around January 20 or 21, 2011, the charge was dismissed. The Shelby County District Attorney's Office later explained that prosecutors did not have enough witnesses willing to testify in court. Years passed, and then the story took a far darker turn in Memphis. Young Dolph was fatally attacked on November 17, 2021, during the day, at Makita's butter cookie shop in his hometown. The incident happened inside the business, where he was struck multiple times. According to the medical examiner, he suffered about 20 wounds. What followed was more than rumor, more than street speculation, and more than whispers passed around the city. Once the case reached court, details began surfacing under oath, and testimony started giving shape to what many had only talked about from a distance. Suddenly, the hit, the investigation, the trial, and even the call tied to Juke Young became part of a much bigger picture. Prosecutors ultimately charged 3 men in connection with Dolph's killing. Justin Johnson, known as Straight Drop, was named in the case. Cornelius Smith was also charged, and he later admitted that he was one of the shooters. Hernandez Govan was accused of organizing the plot and was described by prosecutors as the alleged mastermind behind it. By the time those names entered the courtroom record, this was no longer just a Memphis tragedy being discussed online or debated in the streets. It had become a major criminal case, with testimony, timelines, and direct accusations laid out in front of a jury. Each court appearance pulled back another layer, turning long-running theories into statements made under oath.
The contrast is hard to ignore. Back in 2010, a serious case connected to violence ended with charges being dropped because witnesses would not come forward. More than a decade later, another devastating act in the same city would move through the legal system in a very different way, with investigators and prosecutors building a case piece by piece in public view. That is what made the courtroom revelations so explosive. For years, people talked about ties, motives, and behind-the-scenes moves, but court testimony gave those conversations a new weight. It transformed rumor into evidence-based claims presented before the law. And at the center of all of it was Memphis, the same city where earlier legal drama had once faded due to silence, now becoming the place where one of hip-hop's most shocking killings would be examined in detail before the world. Behind the scenes, the case took a major turn when Jermarcus Johnson, Justin Johnson's brother, accepted related charges and entered a plea agreement in June 2023. In exchange, he agreed to testify against the others, instantly raising the stakes for everyone involved.
Johnson on conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, 35 years. To the convicted felon in possession of a firearm, I'm going to sentence him to 15 years. It's unfortunate that we've witnessed Mr. Johnson's progression in violent activity.
By September 2024, Justin Johnson's trial was underway, and the prosecution wasted no time laying out a stunning theory. During opening statements, Shelby County Deputy District Attorney Paul Hagerman told the jury that Anthony Big Juke Mims had allegedly placed a $100,000 bounty on young Dolph. According to prosecutors, that payment was directly connected to a long-running rap feud, including diss tracks Dolph had released aimed at Big Juke and CMG.
As the trial moved forward, witness testimony painted a picture of how the plot was allegedly organized. Prosecutors claimed Justin Johnson, a Memphis rapper known as Straight Drop, was introduced into the situation through Hernandez Govan. Govan, they said, operated as a go-between in the music world and had connections to CMG. That detail became central to the state's case because it helped explain how street allegations and music industry relationships were allegedly intertwined. The prosecution further argued that Johnson was flown to Atlanta by Big Juck and Govan. There, according to their account, the plan was presented as more than just a mission. They said it was framed as an opportunity, a shortcut to bigger success, and even discussed in connection with a possible CMG record deal. That allegation gave the courtroom a dramatic look at how ambition, loyalty, and rivalry may have collided. Still, one witness stood out above the rest. Cornelius Smith became the person who delivered the most explosive testimony.
Smith admitted in court that he was one of the two gunmen, and his statements gave jurors a detailed version of what prosecutors say happened. His testimony did not just support parts of the case, it became one of the strongest pillars holding it up. In both trials, Smith said Hernandez Govan was the one who informed him and Justin Johnson about the $100,000 bounty allegedly placed on young Dolph by Big Juck. That claim linked multiple names in a way that prosecutors clearly wanted the jury to follow step by step. Smith also testified that there were smaller sums of money being discussed involving other targets, adding another layer to an already disturbing set of allegations.
Taken together, the prosecution's version of events suggested this was not random, impulsive, or disconnected from the ongoing tensions in the rap scene. Instead, they presented it as a coordinated scheme fueled by personal grudges, industry politics, and promised rewards. Every witness, every timeline detail, and every alleged meeting was used to build that picture piece by piece. What made the testimony so gripping was how it connected music, money, and motive in a way that sounded almost unbelievable, yet was being argued in open court. A rap rivalry that had played out publicly in songs and online was now being dissected in a courtroom, with prosecutors claiming those tensions escalated into something much darker. At the center of it all was the question of who knew what, who said what, and who ultimately acted on those alleged promises. With a plea deal already on the table, a cooperating brother prepared to testify, and Cornelius Smith directly implicating key figures, the trial quickly became about far more than one defendant. It turned into a broader examination of how prosecutors believed the entire plot was assembled from the ground up. What came out about the setup was staggering. On a podcast, details surfaced suggesting the plan was far bigger than just targeting young Dolph. According to that breakdown, more than one name had been marked. That changes the entire weight of the story. One of the most chilling parts is this. Key Glock was reportedly on that same list. He wasn't just close to Dolph in music, he was family in every way that mattered. Someone Dolph openly called his brother and cousin. If events had unfolded even slightly differently that weekend, the headline everyone remembered could have been about Glock instead. Just imagine how different the fallout would have looked if the wrong person had crossed paths with them first.
The case became even more intense when Smith testified about what happened after Dolph was attacked. His account claimed that Justin Johnson used FaceTime to contact Big Juck and confirmed that the job had been carried out. That allegation added another dramatic layer to a case already filled with disturbing twists. Money is where the story gets even stranger. Smith said there was supposed to be a major payout tied to the hit. The arrangement, according to testimony, was that the money would be divided up, with Govan receiving $10,000 and each shooter expecting somewhere in the range of $40,000 to $45,000. For a plot this serious, that kind of promised payment suggested a deal everyone involved believed was real. What actually happened, though, sounded almost unbelievable. Instead of receiving the full amount they were allegedly expecting, they never got the real payoff. Smith said only $500 was left in a mailbox after a promise of $100,000. That detail stands out because it turns the entire situation into something even more reckless and chaotic. A six-figure promise allegedly ended with pocket change. It's one of those facts that sounds too outrageous to be true, yet it became one of the most talked about parts of the trial. Investigators also pointed to digital evidence that appeared to support key parts of the timeline. Memphis police testified that Justin Johnson's phone records showed a call placed to Anthony Mims' number at around 12:25 p.m. on the day Dolph was killed. That timing mattered. It placed communication right around the crucial window investigators were focused on. Not long after the attack, analysts reviewing communications reportedly found phrases such as "call Juck" appearing in the records. That detail added more pressure to the prosecution's narrative because it suggested immediate contact and coordination in the aftermath. When phone data starts lining up with testimony, it can become hard for a jury to ignore.
By 2024, the legal outcome for Justin Johnson was clear. He was convicted of first-degree premeditated murder, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, and being a felon in possession. Those convictions closed one chapter of the case, but the details that emerged along the way left a lasting impression. Between the alleged hit list, the disputed payment, the FaceTime claim, and the phone evidence, this wasn't just a straightforward criminal case.
It unfolded like a web of loyalty, betrayal, and failed promises, with each new detail making the full picture even more shocking. A gun charge was part of the case, but the moment that changed everything came when the jury's decision was read aloud in court. Minutes later, the punishment followed. For first-degree murder, the judge handed down a life sentence. On top of that, there were 35 more years for conspiracy and another 15 years for being a felon in possession of a firearm. Those convictions did not fall apart on appeal. The ruling stood, locking in the outcome and closing one chapter while another was still unfolding. As the Tennessee Court of Criminal Appeals moved through the case, attention shifted again in early 2026. On March 10, 2026, just weeks before Key Glock's visit to the cemetery, the legal spotlight turned to Hernandez Govan. His trial had already drawn major interest, especially because of the claims connecting him to the planning behind Dolph's killing. Back in August 2025, Cornelius Smith returned to the witness stand and repeated the same core account he had given before. He again described the alleged $100,000 payment, laid out the role prosecutors said Govan played, and brought up the FaceTime call that allegedly happened after the murder. Those details became central to the state's effort to tie everything together and present a broader picture of how the crime was supposedly organized.
Govan did take the stand, but only briefly. He did not truly present a full defense through his own testimony, leaving the jury to weigh the prosecution's version of events against the gaps and doubts raised during trial. It did not take long for the jurors to make up their minds. After roughly 3 hours of deliberation on August 21, 2025, they returned with a verdict that stunned many people following the case: not guilty on every single count. That result instantly changed the conversation. A case that prosecutors had tried to connect to a larger plan ended with a complete acquittal for Govan, showing just how difficult it can be to move from suspicion and testimony to proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Another major figure remained outside the formal case entirely. Big Juck was never charged in Dolph's murder. In January 2024, he was killed before the state could fully develop any potential case against him as a suspect. Because of that, one of the names that had sparked the most public speculation never faced the courtroom in this matter. The same was true for Yo Gotti. He was never charged with anything related to the case. Despite the rumors that swirled online and the endless commentary that tried to push the story further up the ladder, the prosecution stayed focused on the people accused of carrying out the attack at the street level.
While he was at the bakery, 2 masked men pulled up in a white Mercedes. They opened fire through the bakery window. Dolph was hit 22 times. He died instantly at the scene. But this is the reason why he got killed. For years, Dolph had been caught in a dangerous rap beef with another Memphis rapper, Yo Gotti. In 2017, someone shot at Dolph's SUV with over 100 bullets in Charlotte. Somehow, he survived. Later that same year, he was shot again in Los Angeles.
Court proceedings never expanded into charges against CMG executives. Instead, the trials remained centered on the alleged direct participants and the evidence tied specifically to them. That distinction mattered because public theories often stretched far beyond what prosecutors were actually willing or able to prove in court.
In the middle of all that, outside commentators kept trying to make sense of the patterns surrounding the violence, the fallout, and the names connected to it. One of them, 1090 Jake, summed it up as a cycle of retaliation, framing the events as part of a larger chain reaction rather than a single isolated act. Taken together, the trials revealed something important. The courtroom answered some questions, but it left others hanging. Certain convictions held firm. One defendant walked free. Some widely discussed figures were never charged at all. So even after verdicts were read and sentences were imposed, the full story still felt unsettled, with the legal record saying one thing and public suspicion continuing to say another. The whole situation had been hanging over the city for years. That was the atmosphere surrounding everything. Key Glock stepped into Memorial Park Cemetery with all of that history trailing behind him. A convicted gunman already serving life. An alleged organizer who had been found not guilty and was still free. Big Juck dead with no one arrested in that case. And Yo Gotti staying publicly silent through it all. On top of that, someone from Gotti's own family had been accused in court of putting money behind the killing of the person Glock cared about most. For a long time, nobody said much. Every side kept quiet. No public back and forth. No dramatic statements.
just years of tension sitting there unresolved. That's why the moment landed so hard. When Glock showed up at the gravesite, it felt like that long stretch of silence had finally split open.
What made it even more powerful was who Key Glock had become by that point. Ever since November 2021, he hasn't just been another artist from Memphis trying to hold his spot. His role has been much bigger than that. He became the face carrying enormous weight, the one many people looked at as the person holding Paper Route Empire together, while also protecting the legacy young Dolph left behind. Perkevious LaShawn Cathy signed with Paper Route Empire in 2017. From the beginning, his place in that camp felt deeper than a normal label deal. He wasn't treated like just another artist added to the roster. Right away, he was seen as one of the closest people to Dolph, somebody who moved beside him constantly, collaborated with him often, and stood near him like family rather than just business. Publicly, young Dolph made that bond clear again and again. He referred to Glock as family, not just in private, but where everyone could hear it. Glock spoke about Dolph with that same kind of closeness. He described him in deeply personal terms, calling him his brother, his cousin, his mentor, and even his left-hand man. Those weren't throwaway words. They reflected a relationship that looked rooted in loyalty, trust, and years of shared movement. That connection is what gives every later moment so much extra weight. When people look at Key Glock visiting that headstone, they aren't just seeing an artist paying respects to a label boss. They're seeing someone standing in front of a loss that changed the direction of his life. The man at that grave wasn't simply mourning a collaborator. He was confronting the absence of someone he viewed as part of his foundation.
After Dolph was killed, that reality became impossible to ignore. The loss didn't just leave an emotional void. It also created a new kind of pressure around Glock. Suddenly, whether he asked for it or not, he represented something bigger. To many fans, he became a living extension of Dolph's vision, the person expected to keep the energy, the music, and the movement from fading. That's why his presence at the cemetery resonated far beyond a private visit. It carried years of pain, unanswered questions, and memories that never really settled. Every detail around the case had already made the atmosphere feel heavy. Add in the silence from major figures, the courtroom accusations, and the violence tied to people around the story, and it becomes easier to understand why this moment stood out. By the time Glock arrived there, he wasn't just a rapper making an appearance. He had become a symbol of survival, loyalty, and unfinished grief. In that setting, even a quiet act spoke loudly. What happened at the headstone mattered because of everything that came before it, but also because of who was standing there. Not merely Key Glock the artist, but Key Glock as the person many believe has been carrying Dolph's legacy forward since the day everything changed. For a brief moment on November 17, 2021, Key Glock disappeared from view. His social pages went dark, and the silence spoke volumes. Months later, in a Billboard interview published in March 2022, he opened up about what that period really felt like. Returning to the studio wasn't simple. Every session came with pressure, grief, and the weight of continuing the B legacy after young Dolph. It wasn't just about making music anymore. It was about carrying something bigger than himself. That struggle turned into one of the most important records of his career. On January 18, 2022, Glock released Proud, a tribute to Dolph that immediately connected with listeners. The song became his first appearance on the Billboard Hot 100, a major milestone that made the moment even more emotional. It also earned a place on the Long Live Young Dolph compilation, giving the tribute even more meaning. Instead of slowing down, he kept building. On November 18, 2022, he released Pre-5L, a project created as another salute to the legacy he was determined to protect. Each move made it clear that he wasn't stepping away from that responsibility. He was leaning into it. The momentum carried into the next chapter. In 2023, Glock returned with Glaucoma 2 and stayed active on the road, appearing on the Let's Go Tour, the Yellow Tape Tour, and the Glaucoma Tour. Live shows became a huge part of the story. By the time the Glaucoma Tour wrapped, it had sold nearly 60,000 tickets across major markets, proving his audience was growing far beyond the core fan base that first knew his name. Then came a major business move. In March 2025, Key Glock entered a partnership with Republic Records, but he did it without leaving the Paper Route Empire banner behind. That detail mattered. The deal showed growth, but it also made it clear where his loyalty still stood. Just a couple months later, on May 2nd, 2025, he delivered a huge release, his 4th studio album and his first major label debut. It marked another turning point, the kind of moment artists spend years trying to reach. The rollout brought him to the Breakfast Club, where he promoted the project and explained the thinking behind the new deal.
What made that interview stand out wasn't just the album talk. It was what Glock revealed about a conversation with Dolph shortly before everything changed. He said that about a week before Dolph passed, during a roundtable with Daddy O and a few others, Dolph spoke to him directly. The message was clear and deeply personal. If anything ever happened to him, Glock needed to step up and take things further. That statement changed the way many people looked at Glock's path. Suddenly, the choices he made after 2021 seemed even more intentional. The tribute records, the projects, the tours, the label partnership, the major album push, none of it felt random. It looked like a mission he had been handed, one he was trying to fulfill in real time. Seen from that angle, his rise wasn't only about momentum or chart success. It was also about loyalty, pressure, and purpose. Every release added another layer to that story. Every performance reinforced it. Even as his career expanded, the connection to Paper Route Empire stayed at the center. What started as a period of silence eventually became a defining run. From grief to growth, Key Glock kept moving. And with each step, he showed that carrying a legacy can shape an artist just as much as creating one. Everything about that move had already been discussed. According to Glock, Dolph had already mapped out how things should go if the time ever came. Bringing Tape Glock into the picture was never framed as turning his back on independence. In his eyes, it was simply carrying out a plan that had already been talked through. What really stood out, though, was the way Glock explained his mindset. He summed it up with one question: what would Dolph do? That idea wasn't just something he said for effect. It came across like a real principle, the standard he uses before making any major decision. Every serious move gets measured against that same thought.
Seeing through that perspective, the cemetery visit takes on a completely different meaning. It doesn't look random. It doesn't feel rushed. Instead, it comes off as something deliberate, something weighed carefully before it happened. If Glock truly approaches life and business through the lens of Dolph's guidance, then showing up at Big Juke's grave was not some reckless emotional moment. It was a calculated act, shaped by the same loyalty code he says governs everything else. On another appearance, Glock spoke more openly about Dolph's death itself. He also addressed something a lot of people noticed after the loss: the sudden flood of public affection. From his point of view, much of that support felt performative, the kind of praise that appears only after someone is gone. The conversation turned to a painful reality many fans have pointed out for years. Dolph seemed to receive a wave of recognition and appreciation only when he was no longer here to see it. That led into a bigger question about Memphis. The interviewer asked whether the city still felt like home. Glock's answer, directly or indirectly, painted a complicated picture. He made it clear that he was rarely in Memphis unless work required it. This wasn't someone constantly moving through the city out of comfort or nostalgia. His visits sounded limited, purposeful, and tied to business more than anything else, which is exactly why the April 2026 stop drew so much attention. When Glock returned to Memphis that month, he didn't just pass through. He made a point of going to Memorial Park Cemetery. Once there, he stood on Big Juke's grave, a move that instantly sparked conversation and sent people looking for meaning behind it. Given everything he had already said about loyalty, grief, and how he evaluates major decisions, that moment carried far more weight than a simple visit. Timing made it even more intense. As word of the cemetery stop began circulating, another development unfolded almost at the same time. Yo Gotti's response arrived during that same stretch when the visit was becoming a major topic. The overlap made the situation feel even bigger, as if multiple pieces of a deeper story were surfacing all at once. That narrow period between April 22 and April 28 became the key window. The visit was spreading, reactions were building, people were trying to connect the dots. And because Glock had already made it known that he filters major actions through the question of what Dolph would have wanted, the public didn't see the grave visit as meaningless. They saw intent, they saw symbolism, they saw a message, whether spoken out loud or not. In the end, that's what makes the entire episode so charged. It wasn't only about where Glock went, it was about the philosophy he attached to the move, the loyalty he kept bringing up, and the timing that made everything feel impossible to ignore.
By 2026, clips analyzing his response were suddenly everywhere online, turning a brief moment into a much bigger conversation. Instead of posting a lengthy message on his verified accounts or releasing a diss track, he chose a different route. He answered out loud, face to face with the situation, and that choice made the moment hit even harder. Commentators framed it as a strategic response. Nothing wild, nothing reckless. The tone stayed steady, controlled, and unmistakably intentional. Every line felt measured. Each point landed with purpose. Rather than escalating things with direct threats, he simply made it clear that he was fully aware of the visit and understood exactly what it meant.
From there, he shifted the focus to something deeper. He leaned into his family's name and the legacy attached to it, reminding people that his story was bigger than one tense moment. He also spoke on his work in Memphis, highlighting what he had contributed to the city and the impact he believed he had made over time. The message did not stop there. He brought up CMG as part of that larger record, tying his response to the movement and everything connected to it. Most importantly, he stood up for his brother's name, making it clear that loyalty and family still sat at the center of everything he was saying.